I'm Sarah Chen, 32, and for 3 years I watched my husband David work himself to the bone trying to impress his team, lead Jennifer Walsh, who seemed determined to prove that weekends were just suggestions and family time was negotiable. What Jennifer didn't know was that while she was busy micromanaging my husband's schedule to show off her authority, I was quietly building something that would make her weekend power plays look like child's play. When she finally crossed the line that shattered our marriage plans, I decided it was time to show her what real expectations actually look like. The revelation I'm about to share will change how you think about workplace boundaries forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The thing about Austin's tech scene is that everyone thinks they're the next big disruptor until they meet someone who actually is. I learned this lesson early when I moved here 8 years ago with nothing but a marketing degree, a laptop that barely functioned, and the naive belief that talent alone would open doors. David and I met at a coffee shop in South Austin, where I was desperately trying to secure my third client ever, a local bakery that needed help with their social media presence. He was sitting at the next table frantically debugging code for what I later learned was his first major project at TechFlow Solutions. Our conversation started when my laptop crashed mid-presentation, and David offered to help. As he worked his magic on my dying computer, I explained my fledgling digital marketing business, Chen Digital Marketing, which at the time consisted entirely of me, my broken laptop, and more ambition than sense. David listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about customer acquisition strategies and conversion metrics. Most people's eyes glazed over when I talked about marketing funnels and engagement rates, but David seemed fascinated by the business side of technology. That first conversation lasted 4 hours. David told me about his work at TechFlow, a mid-sized software company that developed enterprise solutions for healthcare organizations. He'd been there for 2 years at that point, having left a comfortable but uninspiring position at a larger corporation because he wanted to be part of something that felt more meaningful. TechFlow's mission of improving healthcare efficiency through better software resonated with his desire to make a tangible difference. What struck me most about David wasn't his technical expertise, though that was impressive, but his genuine humility and work ethic. He talked about his colleagues with respect, his projects with enthusiasm, and his goals with realistic optimism. He was the kind of person who stayed late not because he had to, but because he cared about doing things right. Even then I could see that his dedication might one day become a vulnerability in the wrong hands. Our relationship developed slowly and naturally. David would stop by the coffee shop where I worked most days, and we'd share updates about our respective projects. I watched Chen Digital Marketing grow from that single bakery client to a roster of small businesses across Austin. David witnessed my late nights, my client rejections, and my small victories. He celebrated when I landed my first major contract with a local tech startup, and he held me when I lost a client to a larger agency that promised them the world. By our first anniversary, Chen Digital Marketing had grown to include 3 part-time contractors and a small office in East Austin. David had been promoted to senior software developer at TechFlow, leading crucial projects and earning recognition for his innovative problem-solving approaches. We seemed to be building parallel success stories, each supporting the other's ambitions while maintaining our individual identities. The first time I met Jennifer Walsh was at TechFlow's annual holiday party during our second year together. David had mentioned his new team lead several times, describing her as ambitious, organized, and results-driven. He seemed genuinely excited to work under someone who shared his commitment to excellence, though he occasionally mentioned that her management style was more hands-on than he was used to. Jennifer Walsh commanded attention the moment she entered any room. Tall, impeccably dressed, with short auburn hair styled in a power bob that suggested she spent more on haircuts than most people spent on rent, she moved through the party like a politician working a crowd. Her handshake was firm, her smile perfectly calibrated, and her conversation peppered with industry buzzwords that sounded impressive but often said nothing at all. When David introduced us, Jennifer's assessment was swift and dismissive. Her eyes took in my cocktail dress, purchased from a discount retailer, my simple jewelry, and my general lack of corporate polish. I could see her mental categorization happening in real time: wife of employee, small business owner, probably struggling, definitely not important. Her attention returned to David almost immediately, launching into a detailed discussion about upcoming project deadlines and client expectations. What bothered me wasn't Jennifer's dismissiveness. I'd encountered plenty of people who underestimated small business owners, but rather the possessive way she spoke about David's time and energy. She referenced weekend check-ins as if they were already established routine, mentioned after-hours brainstorming sessions as though they were David's idea, and generally conveyed the impression that his commitment to work should supersede all other considerations. David seemed oblivious to the subtle power play happening in front of him. He nodded enthusiastically as Jennifer outlined her vision for the team's increased productivity, completely missing the implications for our personal time together. I watched his face light up as she praised his recent work, and I realized that Jennifer had identified exactly the right buttons to push. David's need for professional validation, his desire to contribute meaningfully to important projects, and his natural tendency to say yes when asked to go above and beyond made him the perfect target for someone who confused demanding with leading. The changes started small and seemingly reasonable. Jennifer instituted weekly team meetings on Saturday mornings, explaining that the quiet office environment allowed for more focused strategic planning. David accepted this without question, even though it meant cutting short our weekend hiking trips and lazy morning routines. When I expressed mild concern about the Saturday meetings, David defended Jennifer's approach, explaining that the healthcare industry demanded rapid innovation and that Saturday planning sessions gave them a competitive edge. Next came the Sunday email expectations. Jennifer began sending detailed project updates and task assignments every Sunday evening, with the implicit expectation that team members would review and respond promptly. David started spending Sunday afternoons glued to his laptop, analyzing Jennifer's messages and preparing for Monday morning discussions. Our Sunday dinners became hurried affairs, interrupted by David's need to check his phone for urgent updates that rarely seemed truly urgent. The breaking point came 6 months into Jennifer's leadership, during what should have been our long-planned anniversary weekend getaway. We'd booked a cabin in the hill country looking forward to disconnecting from work and celebrating 3 years together. I'd arranged for my contractors to handle all client communications, clearing my schedule completely for the first time in months. David had confirmed with Jennifer that he would be unreachable except for genuine emergencies. Friday evening as we drove toward the cabin, David's phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. She'd discovered what she characterized as a critical issue with the client presentation scheduled for the following Tuesday. The problem required immediate attention, and she needed David's expertise to resolve it. Despite our anniversary plans, despite his confirmed time off, despite the fact that Tuesday was
preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Still 4 days away, Jennifer expected David to return to Austin immediately. I watched my husband's face as he read Jennifer's message, seeing his internal conflict play out in real time. Part of him recognized the manipulation, the convenient timing, the manufactured urgency. But a larger part of him, the part that Jennifer had been carefully cultivating, worried that refusing would demonstrate lack of commitment, damage his reputation, or harm the project's success. Without consulting me, without even acknowledging what this decision meant for our weekend, David started the car and began driving back toward Austin. The 3-hour drive back to the city was conducted in tense silence. David occasionally attempted to explain Jennifer's reasoning or justify the urgency, but I could hear the doubt in his own voice. He knew this wasn't a genuine emergency, just as he knew that Jennifer could have addressed the issue herself or waited until Monday. But he'd been so thoroughly conditioned to prioritize her demands that he couldn't see a viable alternative. We spent our anniversary weekend in David's office, with Jennifer orchestrating what amounted to an elaborate performance of crisis management. The critical issue that had required David's immediate attention turned out to be a minor formatting inconsistency in the presentation slides, something that could have been resolved in 30 minutes on Monday morning. But Jennifer stretched the work across the entire weekend, calling multiple team meetings, requesting numerous revisions, and generally ensuring that David's sacrifice would be as visible and comprehensive as possible. I realized sitting in TechFlow's lobby while David worked through our anniversary weekend, that this wasn't about project requirements or client expectations. This was about Jennifer establishing dominance, demonstrating her power to disrupt David's personal life whenever she chose. More troubling was David's apparent acceptance of this dynamic, his willingness to sacrifice our relationship for the approval of someone who clearly viewed him as a resource to be consumed rather than a person to be respected. That Sunday evening, as we finally returned to our apartment with nothing to show for our anniversary except David's exhaustion and my growing resentment, I made a decision that would change everything. I'd spent 3 years watching Jennifer systematically erode the boundaries between David's work and personal life, using his dedication against him while positioning herself as the arbiter of his professional future. She'd calculated that a small business owner like me posed no threat to her authority, that David's wife could be safely ignored while she reshaped his priorities to serve her agenda. Jennifer Walsh had no idea what she was dealing with, and it was time to show her the difference between actual power and the petty authority of a middle manager who confused control with leadership. The education I was about to provide would be comprehensive, public, and absolutely unforgettable. What Jennifer didn't know was that while she'd been playing office politics with my husband's schedule, I'd been building something that made her little kingdom look like a sandbox. Tomorrow her real education would begin, and by the time I was finished, she'd understand exactly what my expectations actually looked like. Part 2, the origin world. Building a business from scratch in Austin's competitive landscape taught me that perception rarely matches reality, especially when you're operating from the margins of an established ecosystem. While the city marketed itself as a haven for entrepreneurs and innovators, the truth was more nuanced. Success here depended less on your brilliant ideas and more on your ability to navigate invisible networks of influence, funding, and social capital that determined who got opportunities and who got overlooked. Chen Digital Marketing started in the spare bedroom of my cramped apartment near UT campus, where rent was barely affordable, and the walls were thin enough that I could hear every conversation my neighbors had. My office setup consisted of a folding table from Target, a second-hand office chair that squeaked whenever I moved, and that perpetually dying laptop that David had rescued during our first meeting. The glamorous entrepreneur lifestyle, portrayed in tech magazines, bore no resemblance to my reality of ramen noodle dinners, late-night client calls, and the constant anxiety that comes with never knowing when your next payment might arrive. My family background hadn't prepared me for entrepreneurship. My parents, both first-generation immigrants from Taiwan, had built their lives around stability and predictable income. My father worked as an accountant for a mid-sized firm, while my mother managed the books for several small restaurants in Houston's Chinatown. They'd sacrificed enormously to ensure I could attend university, viewing my marketing degree as a pathway to a secure corporate position with health insurance and a retirement plan. When I announced my intention to start my own business, instead of accepting a perfectly reasonable offer from an established marketing firm, their disappointment was palpable. The cultural expectations weighed heavily during those early months. Traditional success metrics meant steady employment, preferably with a company large enough that people had heard of it. Entrepreneurship, especially in something as intangible as digital marketing, seemed reckless and self-indulgent. My parents worried that I was throwing away educational opportunities they'd worked so hard to provide, choosing uncertainty over the security they'd never been able to take for granted. Their concerns weren't unreasonable. I was essentially gambling our financial future on my ability to convince strangers that I could solve problems they didn't always realize they had. Austin's tech scene in those days felt simultaneously welcoming and exclusionary. The city attracted ambitious people from across the country, all drawn by stories of startup success and the promise of building something meaningful. Networking events happened constantly, from casual meetups at coffee shops to elaborate conferences at downtown hotels. Everyone talked about disruption and innovation, about changing the world through technology and creative problem solving. But beneath the surface optimism lurked fierce competition for resources, attention, and opportunities that could make or break emerging businesses. The established players in Austin's marketing landscape viewed newcomers like me with polite skepticism. Large agencies dominated the premium clients, while established consultants had locked up the mid-tier market through years of relationship building. My positioning as a boutique digital specialist, serving small businesses, wasn't necessarily taken seriously by people who measured success in terms of Fortune 500 contracts and multi-million-dollar campaigns. At industry events, I often felt like I was speaking a different language, discussing engagement rates and conversion optimization, while others debated brand strategy for major corporations. What I lacked in connections and pedigree, I tried to compensate for through sheer dedication and results-focused service. While larger agencies treated small business clients as training opportunities for junior staff, I gave every project my complete attention. I learned each client's industry deeply, understanding their customers' behavior patterns and competitive challenges. My proposals weren't just lists of services, but comprehensive strategies tailored to specific business goals and budget constraints. This approach took significantly more time than the cookie-cutter solutions offered by many competitors, but it generated results that kept clients engaged and led to referrals. The learning curve was steep and often brutal. Digital marketing evolved constantly, with platform algorithms changing unpredictably and new tools appearing monthly. I spent evenings studying case studies, testing new approaches, and trying to stay ahead of trends that could impact client performance. Every failed campaign felt personal, every success worth celebrating, but also pressure to maintain momentum. The responsibility of other people's marketing budgets weighed heavily, especially when working with small businesses, where every dollar spent on advertising represented real sacrifice and genuine hope for growth. Financial pressure was constant during the first 2 years. Client payments arrived irregularly, often 30 to 60 days after invoicing, while my expenses remained fixed and immediate. I learned to manage cash flow like a chess game, timing major purchases and personal expenses around anticipated client payments. There were months when I considered abandoning the business for the security of traditional employment, especially when unexpected expenses coincided with delayed payments. Pride kept me going during the worst periods, along with growing evidence that my unconventional approach was generating real value for clients. The relationship with David provided stability during this chaotic period, both emotionally and practically. He never pressured me to abandon the business when times were difficult, instead offering encouragement and practical support. David helped with technical aspects of my website, provided objective feedback on client proposals, and served as a sounding board when I needed to work through complex strategic decisions. His steady income from TechFlow meant we could maintain our lifestyle even when my business income fluctuated dramatically. More importantly, he genuinely believed in my capabilities and vision, providing confidence when my own certainty wavered. David's work environment at TechFlow seemed almost luxurious compared to my solo operation. The company occupied several floors of a modern building in downtown Austin, with open-plan workspaces, fully equipped conference rooms, and amenities like free coffee and catered lunch meetings. David described a collaborative atmosphere where talented people worked on meaningful projects with clear deadlines and defined success metrics. The stability and resources available in corporate environments sometimes made my entrepreneurial struggles seem unnecessarily difficult, though David never suggested I should seek similar employment. TechFlow's culture emphasized work-life balance and employee well-being, at least according to David's early descriptions. The company offered flexible scheduling, remote work options, and encouraged employees to pursue professional development opportunities. Management seemed to understand that sustainable productivity required respecting personal boundaries and allowing people to recharge outside the office. This progressive approach attracted talented developers like David, who wanted to contribute to meaningful projects without sacrificing their personal lives or relationships. The contrast between my business-building stress and David's corporate stability created an interesting dynamic in our relationship. I envied his predictable schedule and steady paycheck, while he admired my independence and creative control. We learned to support each other's different challenges, with David providing practical stability, while I brought entrepreneurial energy and risk-taking perspective to our shared decisions. Our complementary approaches to work seemed to strengthen our relationship, giving us diverse experiences to draw from when facing decisions or solving problems together. Watching David's contentment with his corporate role made Jennifer Walsh's eventual arrival more jarring. For 3 years, David had thrived in TechFlow's collaborative environment, building strong relationships with colleagues and contributing to projects he found genuinely meaningful. His job provided intellectual challenges without overwhelming stress, adequate compensation without constant uncertainty, and colleagues who respected his expertise without demanding unhealthy sacrifices. When Jennifer joined the company as his new team lead, the gradual erosion of these positive conditions would become impossible to ignore. The Austin tech ecosystem's emphasis on innovation and disruption meant that management trends spread quickly between companies. New leadership approaches, productivity methodologies, and performance metrics appeared regularly, as organizations tried to maintain competitive advantages. Jennifer's management style represented one such trend, emphasizing intensive collaboration, extended availability, and blurred boundaries between work and personal time. What seemed like forward-thinking leadership to some felt increasingly oppressive to those directly affected by her demands. By the time I recognized the threat Jennifer posed to our relationship and David's well-being, Chen Digital Marketing had evolved into something I'd never initially imagined. My client roster included established businesses across multiple industries. My revenue had stabilized at comfortable levels, and my reputation within Austin's small business community provided steady referrals and growth opportunities. The struggling entrepreneur working from her spare bedroom had become someone with genuine influence and resources, though Jennifer's dismissive assessment suggested she hadn't bothered to investigate my actual accomplishments. Understanding Austin's interconnected business landscape would prove crucial in the coming confrontation with Jennifer. What appeared to be separate industries and social circles were actually linked through complex networks of clients, suppliers, partners, and mutual connections. My years of building relationships within the small business community had created unexpected access to information and influence that extended far beyond marketing services. Jennifer's assumption that David's wife posed no threat to her authority would soon prove to be a catastrophic miscalculation. Part 3: The Power Structure Introduction. Jennifer Walsh's ascension to team lead at TechFlow Solutions arrived with the fanfare typically reserved for corporate restructuring initiatives, complete with company-wide emails about enhanced leadership development and strategic vision alignment. Robert Johnson, TechFlow's CEO, had recruited Jennifer from a larger consulting firm in Dallas, specifically seeking someone who could elevate the development team's performance and prepare the company for anticipated growth. Her credentials were impressive on paper: an MBA from a prestigious program, 5 years of management experience, and a track record of improving productivity metrics at her previous positions. The announcement of Jennifer's hiring emphasized her expertise in agile development methodologies and her success in leading high-performing teams through complex technical challenges. Robert positioned her arrival as evidence of TechFlow's commitment to professional excellence and competitive positioning within Austin's crowded tech market. Existing team members, including David, were encouraged to view this leadership change as an opportunity for skill development and career advancement under someone with proven corporate experience. Jennifer's first team meeting established the tone for everything that would follow. She arrived precisely on time, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her presentation was polished and comprehensive, outlining her assessment of the team's current capabilities, identifying areas for improvement, and introducing new processes designed to maximize efficiency and client satisfaction. She spoke confidently about deliverables, key performance indicators, and cross-functional collaboration opportunities that would position everyone for success. What struck David initially as professionalism and high standards gradually revealed itself as something more problematic. Jennifer's management philosophy centered on the belief that exceptional results required exceptional commitment, and that exceptional commitment meant being available whenever work demanded attention. She introduced concepts like flexible scheduling, which in practice meant working whenever she deemed necessary, and responsive communication, which translated to immediate replies to her messages regardless of timing or personal circumstances. The team dynamics shifted noticeably within Jennifer's first month. Previously, David and his colleagues had operated with considerable autonomy, managing their own schedules and deadlines while collaborating organically on shared projects. Jennifer replaced this informal structure with detailed project management protocols, regular check-in meetings, and comprehensive reporting requirements that documented every aspect of their work. She justified these changes as necessary for maintaining client confidence and ensuring consistent delivery quality across all engagements. Jennifer's background in corporate consulting had trained her to identify inefficiencies and eliminate practices that didn't directly contribute to measurable outcomes. Unfortunately, many of the informal traditions that had made TechFlow an enjoyable workplace fell into this category. The casual Friday afternoon conversations that had fostered creative problem-solving became scheduled brainstorming sessions with defined agendas. The flexible lunch hours that allowed people to recharge and socialize were replaced with working lunches focused on project status updates. More concerning was Jennifer's approach to performance evaluation and professional development. She implemented a ranking system that required comparing team members against each other, rather than against objective standards, creating artificial competition where collaboration had previously existed. David found himself analyzing his colleagues' work not to offer support or learn from their approaches, but to ensure his own contributions appeared sufficiently valuable in comparison. This shift from collective success to individual positioning undermined the cooperative atmosphere that had initially attracted him to TechFlow. Jennifer's communication style reinforced these competitive dynamics, while maintaining a veneer of supportive leadership. She offered praise and criticism in ways that seemed encouraging on the surface, but carried subtle implications about status and job security. David might receive compliments on his technical skills, while hearing suggestions that his project management abilities needed development. These mixed messages created constant uncertainty about his standing within the team and his prospects for advancement under Jennifer's leadership. The physical workspace began reflecting Jennifer's management philosophy as well. She instituted open-door policies that theoretically encouraged communication, but practically eliminated privacy and downtime. Her office, strategically positioned to observe the entire development area, allowed her to monitor everyone's activities throughout the day. Team members became conscious of how their behavior might be
interpreted, leading to performative productivity and decreased authentic collaboration. Jennifer's relationship with upper management, particularly Robert Johnson, appeared exceptionally strong from the beginning. She provided regular updates about team productivity improvements, efficiency gains, and enhanced client satisfaction metrics. Her reports consistently painted a picture of positive transformation under her leadership, emphasizing quantifiable results and strategic positioning achievements. Robert's obvious satisfaction with Jennifer's performance created an environment where questioning her methods felt like challenging company priorities. The broader TechFlow organization seemed initially pleased with Jennifer's impact on the development team. Other departments reported improved communication and more predictable project timelines. Client feedback included positive comments about increased responsiveness and attention to detail. These external validations of Jennifer's approach made it difficult for team members to articulate their concerns without appearing resistant to positive change or unwilling to adapt to higher standards. David's colleagues responded to Jennifer's leadership in various ways that would become increasingly significant over time. Michael Torres, a senior developer with aspirations for management roles, embraced Jennifer's approach enthusiastically, volunteering for additional responsibilities and modeling the intensive commitment she advocated. His obvious alignment with Jennifer's expectations earned him preferred project assignments and public recognition during team meetings. Lisa Rodriguez, a newer team member still establishing her reputation, followed Jennifer's directives without question while privately expressing concerns to trusted colleagues. She recognized that challenging Jennifer's authority could jeopardize her position, especially during her probationary period, but she also worried about the long-term sustainability of the increased pressure and time demands. Ryan Martinez occupied a middle position, competent enough to meet Jennifer's standards while experienced enough to remember how things had operated previously. He complied with new requirements while maintaining some skepticism about their necessity and effectiveness. Ryan's occasional questions about timing or resource allocation were tolerated but discouraged through Jennifer's responses and body language. Ashley Kim, the team's most experienced developer aside from David, adopted a strategy of quiet compliance while maintaining strict boundaries around her personal time. She fulfilled all professional obligations while refusing to engage in the informal relationship-building activities that Jennifer encouraged. Ashley's approach demonstrated that it was possible to perform well without embracing Jennifer's comprehensive vision of team commitment. The division among team members created additional stress for David, who found himself caught between loyalty to longtime colleagues and pressure to demonstrate enthusiasm for Jennifer's leadership. His natural tendency to seek harmony and avoid conflict made it difficult to navigate the increasingly political environment Jennifer had created. Supporting Jennifer meant potentially alienating colleagues he respected, while expressing concerns risked being labeled as resistant to improvement or unwilling to embrace necessary changes. Jennifer's influence extended beyond immediate team management through her participation in company-wide initiatives and strategic planning processes. She volunteered for high-visibility projects, contributed to policy development discussions, and offered insights during leadership meetings that demonstrated her broader business acumen. This organizational involvement positioned her as a rising star within TechFlow's management structure, making her approval increasingly valuable for anyone seeking career advancement. The intersection of personal ambition and professional survival created complex dynamics that Jennifer navigated skillfully. She understood that different team members were motivated by different concerns, and she tailored her approach accordingly. David's desire for meaningful work and professional recognition made him responsive to challenging assignments and public praise. Michael's management aspirations made him eager to demonstrate leadership potential through enthusiastic support of her initiatives. What unified Jennifer's various management techniques was their cumulative effect on work-life balance and personal autonomy. Whether through subtle pressure or explicit expectations, she consistently communicated that exceptional performance required prioritizing work above other considerations. This message became particularly pronounced in her interactions with David, whose technical skills and project ownership made him especially valuable for her success metrics. The foundation Jennifer established during her first few months would support increasingly aggressive demands on David's time and energy. Her systematic approach to reshaping team culture, combined with her strong relationships with upper management, created an environment where resistance seemed futile and compliance appeared to be the only viable path forward. By the time David and I recognized the full implications of her leadership style, she had already consolidated enough power to make challenging her authority extremely difficult and potentially career-threatening. Part 4. The supporting opposition. The ecosystem that enabled Jennifer's systematic erosion of workplace boundaries extended far beyond her direct authority, encompassing colleagues, policies, and cultural dynamics that reinforced her control while providing plausible cover for increasingly unreasonable demands. Understanding this broader network of enablers became crucial as I watched David struggle to maintain his personal life while meeting escalating professional expectations that seemed designed to test his loyalty rather than accomplish meaningful work. Michael Torres emerged as Jennifer's most enthusiastic ally, though his motivations were transparently self-serving rather than based on genuine belief in her management philosophy. Michael had joined TechFlow 6 months before Jennifer's arrival, bringing technical competence but harboring obvious frustration with his previous role's limited advancement opportunities. He viewed Jennifer's arrival as a chance to distinguish himself through visible alignment with her priorities and methods, calculating that early loyalty would translate into preferred treatment and career advancement. Michael's support for Jennifer manifested through public endorsement of her initiatives, voluntary participation in weekend activities, and subtle criticism of colleagues who seemed less committed to the team's enhanced performance standards. During meetings, he consistently reinforced Jennifer's talking points, often rephrasing her comments in ways that suggested independent agreement rather than obvious coordination. His enthusiastic adoption of Jennifer's preferred terminology about excellence, commitment, and results-driven culture provided linguistic validation for her increasingly demanding expectations. More problematically, Michael served as Jennifer's informal intelligence network within the team, reporting on colleague attitudes, personal conversations, and signs of resistance to her leadership. He positioned this surveillance as concern for team cohesion and shared success, but the effect was to create an atmosphere of wariness and self-censorship among people who had previously communicated openly. David began noticing that casual conversations stopped when Michael approached, and that his comments during meetings were sometimes referenced in later discussions with Jennifer. Michael's ambitions extended beyond simple advancement within the development team. He frequently mentioned his interest in project management roles, business development opportunities, and eventual leadership positions within TechFlow or similar organizations. Jennifer encouraged these aspirations while using them to motivate his continued support for her methods. She provided him with additional responsibilities, included him in strategic planning discussions, and offered professional development opportunities that weren't available to other team members. Lisa Rodriguez represented a different type of enabler, one whose compliance stemmed from vulnerability rather than ambition. As the newest team member, Lisa felt constant pressure to prove her worth and establish her place within the organization. Jennifer's demanding standards created an environment where Lisa couldn't afford to appear uncommitted or unwilling to meet expectations, regardless of their reasonableness or sustainability. Lisa's recent graduation from a competitive computer science program had prepared her technically but not politically for the workplace dynamics she encountered under Jennifer's leadership. She approached each assignment with meticulous attention to detail, worked longer hours than necessary to ensure perfect deliverables, and accepted additional responsibilities without question. Her eagerness to prove herself made her particularly susceptible to Jennifer's subtle manipulations about team commitment and professional growth. The generational dynamics also played a role in Lisa's compliance. Having entered the workforce during a period of economic uncertainty and intense competition for technical positions, she viewed demanding work environments as normal rather than problematic. Jennifer skillfully reinforced these assumptions, presenting intensive collaboration and extended availability as standard practices in high-performing organizations, rather than unusual demands that prioritized control over productivity. Lisa's personal circumstances further complicated her ability to resist Jennifer's encroachment on work-life balance. She was paying off substantial student loans while supporting her parents, who had immigrated from Mexico and worked in service industries without reliable benefits or job security. The stability and compensation offered by TechFlow represented significant improvement over her family's economic situation, making her reluctant to jeopardize her position by appearing insufficiently committed or cooperative. Ryan Martinez occupied a more complex position within Jennifer's sphere of influence, possessing enough experience and technical expertise to recognize the problematic nature of her management approach while feeling constrained from addressing it directly. Ryan had worked in the tech industry for over 8 years, experiencing various management styles and organizational cultures that provided perspective on what constituted reasonable versus excessive workplace demands. Ryan's initial response to Jennifer's leadership was cautiously optimistic. He appreciated her organizational skills, clear communication, and systematic approach to project management. However, as her expectations expanded beyond professional boundaries, he began expressing private concerns to trusted colleagues while maintaining public compliance with her directives. This balancing act required constant vigilance and emotional energy that detracted from his actual work performance. The political dynamics at TechFlow made it difficult for Ryan to voice concerns about Jennifer's methods without appearing resistant to positive change or advancement. Robert Johnson's obvious satisfaction with Jennifer's impact on team productivity metrics meant that criticism could be interpreted as personal failure to adapt rather than legitimate feedback about unsustainable practices. Ryan found himself documenting concerning incidents while looking for appropriate channels to address them constructively. Ryan's personal life provided additional context for his reluctance to challenge Jennifer directly. He was married with 2 young children, and his wife had recently reduced her work schedule to manage increased childcare responsibilities. The family depended on his income and benefits, making job security a priority that sometimes conflicted with his professional principles. This financial pressure created additional stress when Jennifer's demands began impacting his ability to fulfill family obligations. Ashley Kim represented the most sophisticated form of resistance within Jennifer's sphere of control, demonstrating that it was possible to meet professional obligations while maintaining strict boundaries around personal time and energy. Ashley's approach required exceptional competence and strategic thinking, as she had to perform flawlessly while refusing to engage in the informal relationship-building activities that Jennifer used to secure loyalty and compliance. Ashley had witnessed similar management transitions throughout her career and recognized the patterns underlying Jennifer's seemingly innovative approaches. She understood that enthusiastic compliance often led to escalating demands, rather than job security or advancement, and she had developed techniques for maintaining professional effectiveness without becoming emotionally invested in workplace dynamics beyond her direct responsibilities. Ashley's resistance strategy involved meticulous documentation of her work, strict adherence to official policies and procedures, and polite but firm refusal to participate in activities outside her job description. She attended mandatory meetings but declined optional social events, completed assigned projects perfectly but didn't volunteer for additional responsibilities, and maintained professional courtesy, while avoiding personal relationships with Jennifer or her obvious allies. The effectiveness of Ashley's approach created tension within the team dynamic, as it demonstrated that Jennifer's demands weren't actually necessary for high-quality work performance. This contradiction undermined Jennifer's narrative about exceptional commitment requiring exceptional availability, forcing her to find alternative explanations for Ashley's success while maintaining pressure on other team members to embrace her preferred culture. Ashley's strategy also provided a model for potential resistance that other team members could observe and potentially emulate. Though few possessed her combination of technical expertise, financial security, and emotional detachment necessary to sustain such an approach. Jennifer recognized this threat and began subtly marginalizing Ashley through project assignments, meeting invitations, and professional development opportunities. The broader TechFlow organization inadvertently supported Jennifer's methods through policies and cultural dynamics that prioritized measurable outcomes over employee well-being or work-life balance. The company's emphasis on client satisfaction, competitive positioning, and rapid growth created an environment where intensive work commitments could be justified as necessary business practices rather than questionable management choices. Human resources policies at TechFlow provided theoretical protections for employee rights and work-life balance. But the practical implementation of these policies was left to individual managers' discretion. Jennifer skillfully operated within official guidelines while creating informal expectations that effectively nullified their protective intent. She never explicitly required weekend work, but she consistently scheduled important discussions during weekend hours and expressed disappointment when team members weren't available for consultation. The performance evaluation system at TechFlow measured results rather than methods, allowing Jennifer to justify her demanding approach through improved productivity metrics and client feedback. Team members who met their technical obligations while resisting her cultural initiatives could be rated as satisfactory performers, while those who embraced her comprehensive vision of commitment received recognition and advancement opportunities. Robert Johnson's leadership style emphasized delegating authority to department managers while focusing on high-level strategic decisions and external relationships. This approach gave Jennifer considerable autonomy in shaping team culture and individual employee experiences, while insulating him from direct knowledge of potentially problematic practices. His satisfaction with overall results made it unlikely that he would investigate the specific methods used to achieve those outcomes. The competitive nature of Austin's tech industry provided additional justification for Jennifer's intensive management approach. Other companies were known to demand significant time commitments from employees, and the rapid pace of technological change created genuine pressure to maintain competitive advantages through enhanced productivity and innovation. Jennifer positioned her methods as necessary adaptations to market realities rather than personal preferences for control and authority. This complex network of enablers, policies, and cultural dynamics created an environment where Jennifer's escalating demands on David's time and energy appeared reasonable to outside observers while becoming increasingly unsustainable for those directly affected. The system's sophistication made it difficult to identify specific violations or policy breaches, while the cumulative effects systematically eroded the work-life balance that had initially attracted David to TechFlow. Understanding these supporting structures became essential as I prepared to challenge Jennifer's authority and protect David's well-being. The interconnected nature of her power base meant that addressing her behavior would require strategic thinking about multiple relationships, organizational dynamics, and business realities that extended far beyond simple workplace conflicts. Part 5: The Defining Incident. The final weekend that shattered my patience with Jennifer's manipulation arrived during spring in Austin, when the weather was perfect for the outdoor activities David and I had planned to celebrate our third anniversary. We'd reserved a cabin at Garner State Park, a place that held special significance because David had proposed there during a camping trip the previous fall. The weekend represented more than just time away from work. It was meant to be a renewal of our commitment to prioritizing our relationship, despite the increasing pressure from Jennifer's demands on David's schedule. Preparation for this weekend had required weeks of coordination on both sides. I'd rearranged client meetings, delegated urgent projects to my contractors, and cleared my calendar completely for the first time in months. The success of Chen Digital Marketing had brought increased responsibilities and more demanding clients, making truly disconnected time increasingly rare and valuable. David had submitted his time-off request weeks in advance, confirmed it multiple times with Jennifer, and arranged for Michael Torres to handle any genuinely urgent issues that might arise in his absence. The significance of this particular weekend extended beyond anniversary celebrations. Recent months had seen David becoming increasingly stressed and distant, symptoms I'd initially attributed to normal workplace pressures, but now recognized as responses to Jennifer's systematic erosion of his boundaries. Our conversations had become dominated by work concerns, our evenings interrupted by urgent emails that rarely seemed genuinely urgent, and our weekend plans consistently modified to accommodate Jennifer's evolving demands on his time and attention. I'd begun to notice changes in David's personality that concerned me deeply. His natural optimism had been replaced by constant worry about meeting expectations and maintaining Jennifer's approval. He second-guessed decisions that he would have made confidently in the past, spent excessive time on projects that should have been straightforward, and frequently mentioned concerns about his job security despite his obvious competence and value to TechFlow. The weekend was intended to address these concerns directly, providing space for honest conversation about the trajectory of David's career and our relationship. I'd planned activities that would remind us both of the interests and values we'd shared before Jennifer's arrival transformed his work environment. Hiking, swimming, cooking together over a campfire, and sleeping under stars represented the simple pleasures that had sustained us through earlier challenges and stress. Friday afternoon arrived with perfect spring weather and my anticipation for reconnecting with the David I'd fallen in love with, the person who existed beyond Jennifer's sphere of influence and control. We'd loaded the car with camping gear, groceries, and carefully selected books for lazy afternoon reading. The drive to Garner State Park typically took 2 hours, providing transition time to decompress from work stress and focus on each other rather than professional obligations. David seemed genuinely excited as we drove out of Austin, commenting on the beautiful weather and sharing memories from previous trips to the park. For the first hour, his phone remained silent in his pocket, and our conversation flowed naturally across topics unrelated to work or Jennifer's latest initiatives. I began to feel optimistic that this weekend might restore some balance to our relationship and help David recognize how much Jennifer's management style was affecting his well-being. The text message arrived as we reached the outskirts of Austin, just as David was describing his plans for a hiking trail we'd never explored together. His phone buzzed with an incoming message, and despite our agreement to minimize work communication during the weekend, he reflexively checked the notification. I watched his expression change as he read Jennifer's message, seeing the familiar combination of anxiety and resignation that had become his default response to her communications. Jennifer's message was crafted with the calculated urgency that had become her signature manipulation technique. She'd discovered what she characterized as a critical flaw in the client presentation scheduled for Tuesday's board meeting, a presentation that David had completed and submitted for review the previous Wednesday. According to her message, the issue was significant enough to jeopardize TechFlow's relationship with their most important client, and resolving it required David's immediate attention and expertise. The timing of Jennifer's crisis was particularly suspicious, given the context of David's planned absence. The presentation had been reviewed and approved through normal channels, the client had already received preliminary materials, and Tuesday's meeting was still 4 days away. Under normal circumstances, any genuine issues could have been addressed Monday morning with plenty of time for revisions and client communication. The manufactured urgency suggested that Jennifer had deliberately saved this crisis for David's anniversary weekend. David's internal conflict was visible as he processed Jennifer's message and considered his options. Part of him recognized the manipulative timing and questionable urgency of her demands. He'd worked at TechFlow long enough to distinguish between genuine crises and manufactured emergencies, and his technical expertise told him that any presentation issues could wait until Monday without catastrophic consequences. But Jennifer's months of conditioning had created powerful psychological pressure to prioritize her demands above all other considerations. The manipulation was particularly sophisticated because it positioned David's personal time as selfish and irresponsible in the face of professional obligations. Jennifer's message didn't explicitly demand that he cancel his weekend plans, but it created a situation where refusing to return would appear uncommitted and potentially damaging to his career prospects. She'd learned to frame her invasive demands as urgent business needs, rather than personal preferences for control. I watched David struggle with the decision, knowing that my input would influence his choice, but uncertain whether my perspective would be welcomed or resented. Previous attempts to question Jennifer's demands had sometimes made David defensive, as though criticizing her methods implied criticism of his professional judgment or commitment to excellence. The complex emotions surrounding his work situation made honest conversation difficult and potentially counterproductive. Without consulting me about the implications for our anniversary weekend, without acknowledging the weeks of planning and anticipation this decision would destroy, David made the choice that Jennifer had carefully orchestrated. He apologized repeatedly as he turned the car around and began driving back toward Austin, explaining Jennifer's reasoning and expressing hope that we could salvage some portion of the weekend once the crisis was resolved. The drive back to Austin was conducted in painful silence, punctuated by David's increasingly desperate attempts to justify a decision that we both knew was wrong. He repeated Jennifer's talking points about client relationships and professional responsibility, while his tone revealed doubt about their validity. I listened without arguing, recognizing that David was as much a victim of Jennifer's manipulation as our anniversary weekend, but struggling to contain my anger at the systematic destruction of our personal time. The manufactured crisis consumed our entire weekend in exactly the way Jennifer had intended. What should have been 2 days of hiking and relaxation became an extended performance of crisis management, with Jennifer orchestrating multiple team meetings, requesting numerous revisions, and generally ensuring that David's sacrifice would be as comprehensive and visible as possible. The critical flaw that had required immediate attention turned out to be minor formatting inconsistencies that could have been corrected in 30 minutes on Monday morning. Saturday morning found us in TechFlow's office, where Jennifer had assembled the entire development team for an emergency brainstorming session. The building was eerily quiet except for our group, emphasizing the exceptional nature of the situation and the dedication required to address it properly. Jennifer moved through the office with obvious satisfaction, directing activities and making decisions that reinforced her authority while demonstrating her team's responsiveness to urgent demands. The actual work required to address the presentation issues was minimal and could have been completed by any competent team member. However, Jennifer structured the weekend activities to require David's specific expertise and continuous availability, ensuring that he couldn't complete his contributions quickly and return to his interrupted plans. She scheduled review meetings every few hours, requested multiple iterations of minor changes, and insisted on comprehensive testing protocols that extended the work across both weekend days. I spent most of that weekend in TechFlow's lobby, having nothing to contribute to the technical discussions, but unwilling to abandon David completely during what should have been our anniversary celebration. The contrast between my expectations for the weekend and the reality of sitting in a corporate office while my husband performed emergency work on manufactured problems was stark and
demoralizing. Watching Jennifer orchestrate this elaborate manipulation from the lobby gave me insight into her methods and motivations that would prove crucial in planning my response. She wasn't simply a demanding manager who confused intensity with effectiveness. She was someone who deliberately used her authority to demonstrate power and control over her team members' personal lives. The weekend wasn't about resolving genuine problems, but about establishing that her demands took precedence over any competing priorities. Sunday evening, as we finally returned to our apartment with nothing to show for our anniversary weekend except David's exhaustion and my growing resentment, I understood that Jennifer's behavior wouldn't improve through patience or accommodation. She'd systematically tested David's boundaries, found that he would sacrifice our relationship to maintain her approval, and concluded that his personal time was available for her consumption whenever she chose to claim it. The realization that crystallized during that devastating weekend was that Jennifer viewed David as a resource to be maximized rather than a person to be respected. Her management philosophy centered on extracting maximum value from employees while providing minimal regard for their well-being, relationships, or long-term sustainability. She'd calculated that people like David, with strong work ethics and desires for professional validation, could be manipulated into accepting unreasonable demands through careful application of pressure and praise. More disturbing was the recognition that Jennifer had specifically targeted our relationship as a threat to her control over David's priorities. She'd observed his commitment to our anniversary plans and deliberately chosen that weekend to manufacture a crisis, demonstrating that she could disrupt our most important personal moments whenever she felt it necessary to reinforce her authority. This wasn't accidental scheduling or poor timing, it was strategic relationship sabotage designed to isolate David from competing loyalties. As I sat in our apartment that Sunday night, watching David collapse from exhaustion after spending our anniversary weekend serving Jennifer's ego, I made the decision that would define everything that followed. Jennifer Walsh had spent months testing the limits of her power over David's life, systematically eroding the boundaries between professional obligations and personal autonomy. She'd concluded that his wife represented no meaningful threat to her authority, that I could be safely ignored while she reshaped his priorities to serve her purposes. Jennifer's assessment of my irrelevance was about to prove catastrophically wrong. While she'd been playing office politics with my husband's schedule, I'd been building something that made her little kingdom look like a practice exercise. The education I was about to provide would be comprehensive, public, and absolutely unforgettable, delivered through channels that would ensure she understood exactly what real power looked like when wielded by someone who'd learned to play the game at a level she couldn't imagine. Part 6. The Initial Escape Attempt. The Monday morning after our destroyed anniversary weekend marked a turning point in my understanding of what David and I were truly facing with Jennifer's systematic manipulation. As David dragged himself to work, still exhausted from the manufactured crisis that had consumed our celebration, I made a decision that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of our relationship and his career. Instead of accepting Jennifer's authority over our personal time as an unchangeable reality, I began developing a strategy to extract David from her sphere of influence entirely.
My first instinct was to encourage David to seek employment elsewhere, leveraging his technical expertise and strong performance record to find a position with better work-life balance and more reasonable management. Austin's competitive tech market provided numerous opportunities for experienced developers, and David's reputation within the local industry should have made him an attractive candidate for companies that valued both technical competence and professional boundaries. However, as I researched potential opportunities and began conversations with David about alternative career paths, I discovered that Jennifer's psychological manipulation had been more effective than I'd initially realized. David's confidence in his abilities had been systematically undermined through months of mixed messages, conditional praise, and manufactured crises that position normal performance as insufficient and exceptional demand as standard expectations. When I suggested that David consider exploring other opportunities, his response revealed the depth of Jennifer's conditioning. He worried that leaving TechFlow would appear disloyal and unprofessional, that potential employers would question his commitment if he couldn't adapt to demanding leadership, and that he might not find another position with comparable compensation and growth potential. These concerns weren't entirely irrational, but they were disproportionate to the actual risks involved in changing jobs within Austin's thriving tech ecosystem. More troubling was David's internalization of Jennifer's narrative about exceptional performance requiring exceptional sacrifice. He'd begun to view her demands as evidence of his value to the organization rather than signs of poor management and boundary violations. When clients praised TechFlow's responsiveness or when projects received positive feedback, David attributed these successes to Jennifer's intensive approach rather than to his own technical skills and professional dedication. The psychological dynamics reminded me of relationships I'd observed between manipulative partners and their victims, where systematic erosion of self-confidence created dependence on the manipulator's approval and validation. Jennifer had positioned herself as the arbiter of David's professional worth, making him afraid to trust his own judgment about reasonable workplace expectations or his marketability to other employers. My attempts to counter Jennifer's influence through rational discussion about career alternatives often backfired, creating tension between David and me rather than clarity about his situation. When I pointed out specific examples of her unreasonable demands or manipulative timing, David sometimes became defensive, as though criticism of Jennifer implied criticism of his professional judgment or commitment to excellence. The complex emotions surrounding his work situation made honest conversation difficult and potentially counterproductive. I realized that direct confrontation with Jennifer's methods wouldn't succeed because David had been conditioned to interpret resistance as personal failure rather than appropriate boundary setting. Instead of continuing to argue against her approach, I decided to focus on strengthening David's confidence and independence through support for his professional development and career exploration outside Jennifer's direct influence. The strategy involved encouraging David to attend industry networking events, professional development workshops, and technical conferences where he could interact with developers from other organizations and gain perspective on normal workplace cultures. These activities would provide exposure to different management styles and work environments without explicitly challenging his loyalty to TechFlow or Jennifer's leadership. I also began highlighting David's technical achievements and professional accomplishments in ways that reinforced his value independent of Jennifer's approval. When clients complimented his work, when colleagues sought his expertise, or when projects succeeded due to his contributions, I made sure these successes were celebrated and remembered as evidence of his capabilities rather than validation of Jennifer's management methods. The networking strategy produced unexpected insights into Jennifer's reputation within Austin's tech community. During conversations with other industry professionals, I learned that Jennifer's previous position in Dallas had ended under circumstances that weren't entirely positive. While her LinkedIn profile and TechFlow's announcement had emphasized her achievements and voluntary career advancement, informal discussions revealed concerns about her management style and employee retention issues at her former company. Several people mentioned hearing about problems with work-life balance and employee turnover in teams Jennifer had managed, though the specific details were often vague or secondhand. The pattern suggested that her current behavior at TechFlow wasn't an adaptation to new responsibilities but a continuation of established practices that had created problems elsewhere. This information provided valuable context for understanding her methods and predicting her likely responses to different forms of resistance. David's participation in professional development activities gradually began producing positive effects on his confidence and perspective. Conversations with developers from other companies revealed that Jennifer's demands were indeed unusual, and that healthy work environments maintained clearer boundaries between professional obligations and personal time. These external validations helped David recognize that his concerns about her management style were legitimate rather than signs of insufficient commitment or adaptability. However, Jennifer quickly noticed David's increased involvement in outside professional activities and began implementing countermeasures designed to limit his exposure to alternative perspectives. She started scheduling important meetings during times when David had planned to attend networking events, creating urgent deadlines that conflicted with conference attendance, and generally making it difficult for him to maintain connections outside TechFlow without appearing uncommitted to his primary responsibilities. Jennifer's resistance to David's professional development activities revealed her awareness that external perspectives posed a threat to her control over his career narrative. She understood that exposure to normal workplace cultures would undermine her positioning of intensive demands as standard industry practices, and she moved quickly to isolate him from influences that might encourage resistance to her authority. The escalation of Jennifer's controlling behavior in response to David's modest attempts at professional independence confirmed my suspicions about her motivations and methods. She wasn't simply a demanding manager who confused intensity with effectiveness, she was someone who deliberately isolated team members from external perspectives that might challenge her authority or provide alternative career options. My own business experience provided insight into the psychological techniques Jennifer was employing and potential strategies for countering them. Building Chen Digital Marketing had required navigating relationships with controlling clients, manipulative competitors, and unreasonable suppliers who tried to leverage power imbalances for their own advantage. The skills I'd developed for managing these business relationships translated surprisingly well to understanding workplace manipulation and developing resistance strategies. The key insight from my entrepreneurial experience was that manipulative people relied on their targets' isolation and limited options to maintain control. Jennifer's effectiveness depended on David believing that her approval was essential for his career success and that alternatives to her management were either unavailable or professionally damaging. Challenging these assumptions required providing David with concrete evidence of his value and marketability independent of Jennifer's validation. I began documenting David's professional accomplishments, client feedback, and technical contributions in ways that could support future job applications or performance discussions. This documentation served both practical and psychological purposes, creating a record of his value while reinforcing his confidence in his abilities, independent of Jennifer's conditional praise and criticism. The process of documenting David's achievements also revealed the extent to which Jennifer had been claiming credit for his work and that of other team members. Her reports to upper management consistently emphasized her strategic guidance and leadership while minimizing individual contributors' roles in project successes. This pattern of credit appropriation was another classic manipulation technique designed to make team members dependent on her advocacy for recognition and advancement. David's growing awareness of Jennifer's credit appropriation created additional motivation for exploring career alternatives as he began to understand that staying at TechFlow under her leadership might limit his professional growth regardless of his technical performance. However, Jennifer's psychological conditioning remained strong enough that David continued to hesitate about making decisive moves toward independence. The breakthrough in David's perspective came during a particularly egregious example of Jennifer's manipulation involving a project that David had conceptualized, developed, and implemented almost entirely independently. When the client praised the innovative solution during a quarterly review meeting, Jennifer presented the work as an example of her strategic vision and collaborative leadership, barely mentioning David's central role in the project's success. David's reaction to this blatant appropriation of his work marked the first time he'd expressed genuine anger about Jennifer's behavior rather than confusion or self-doubt. The clear injustice of the situation pierced through the psychological conditioning that had made him question his own perceptions and professional judgment. For the first time since Jennifer's arrival, David acknowledged that her treatment of him was unacceptable rather than challenging but ultimately beneficial. This moment of clarity provided an opening for more honest conversation about David's career situation and our relationship priorities. Without the defensive barriers that had complicated previous discussions, David was able to recognize that Jennifer's demands had indeed become unreasonable and that her management style was affecting both his professional development and our personal happiness. However, recognition of the problem didn't immediately translate into decisive action toward independence. David remained concerned about the practical and professional implications of leaving TechFlow, particularly given Jennifer's influence within the organization and her relationships with upper management. The psychological damage from months of manipulation couldn't be reversed through a single moment of clarity, and rebuilding David's confidence would require sustained effort and support. My role during this period involved providing emotional support while avoiding pressure that might trigger David's defensive responses or create additional stress during an already difficult time. The balance between encouragement and patience required careful attention to his emotional state and readiness for change, recognizing that pushing too hard or too fast might backfire and strengthen Jennifer's influence over his decisions. The escape attempt strategy evolved from direct confrontation with Jennifer's authority to systematic undermining of her psychological control over David's professional confidence and career narrative. This approach required longer-term thinking and more sophisticated understanding of workplace dynamics, but it offered better prospects for sustainable change that would protect David from similar manipulation in future positions. As David's awareness of Jennifer's manipulative methods increased, he began developing modest resistance strategies that allowed him to maintain professional obligations while protecting some personal boundaries. These small acts of independence, such as declining optional weekend activities or maintaining scheduled time off despite manufactured urgencies, represented significant progress given the psychological conditioning he'd experienced. Jennifer's response to David's increased resistance confirmed the accuracy of my assessment regarding her motivations and methods. Rather than respecting improved boundaries or acknowledging legitimate concerns about work-life balance, she escalated her demands and began implementing more sophisticated pressure techniques designed to reassert her control over his priorities and schedule. The escalation pattern revealed that Jennifer viewed David's growing independence as a direct threat to her authority that required immediate and comprehensive response. Her willingness to damage team morale and organizational effectiveness in pursuit of personal control demonstrated that her management philosophy prioritized dominance over results, making accommodation or compromise impossible. This realization marked the end of my attempts to solve the problem through David's individual resistance or career change strategies. Jennifer's systematic approach to psychological manipulation and her escalating responses to modest challenges indicated that she wouldn't accept any reduction in her control over David's life without significant external pressure that threatened her own position and reputation. The failure of conventional escape strategies forced me to consider more aggressive approaches that would address Jennifer's behavior directly rather than trying to work around it through David's individual actions. The resources and relationships I'd built through Chen Digital Marketing would prove essential for implementing these alternative strategies, though I hadn't yet recognized the full scope of what would be required to neutralize someone as systematically manipulative as Jennifer Walsh. Part 7: The Mentor and Skill Discovery. The turning point in my understanding of how to effectively challenge Jennifer's manipulation came through an unexpected encounter with Patricia Williams, a seasoned executive consultant who had built her reputation by helping organizations identify and address toxic leadership patterns. Patricia's expertise had been developed through decades of corporate experience, including several high-profile interventions where she'd successfully removed manipulative managers while protecting their victims from retaliation and career damage. I met Patricia at a small business networking event in downtown Austin where she was speaking about organizational culture and leadership effectiveness. Her presentation focused on the hidden costs of toxic management, including employee turnover, reduced productivity, and reputational damage that often remained invisible until significant harm had been done. What caught my attention was her detailed description of manipulation techniques that perfectly matched Jennifer's behavior patterns with David and his team. During the networking portion of the event, I approached Patricia with what I framed as hypothetical concerns about a friend's workplace situation. Her response demonstrated immediate recognition of the dynamics I described, and she offered insights that transformed my understanding of what David was experiencing and what would be required to address it effectively. Patricia explained that manipulative managers like Jennifer operated through systematic psychological conditioning that made their victims doubt their own perceptions and professional judgment. The process typically began with establishing themselves as the sole source of validation and advancement opportunities, then gradually escalating demands while positioning resistance as evidence of insufficient commitment or capability. The sophistication of these manipulation techniques meant that traditional responses such as HR complaints, direct confrontation, or individual resistance often failed or backfired. Manipulative managers were typically skilled at documenting their behavior in ways that appeared reasonable to outside observers while creating psychological pressure that wasn't easily visible or quantifiable. They also usually cultivated relationships with upper management that made challenging their authority seem risky for anyone concerned about their own career prospects. Patricia's analysis of the situation provided crucial insight into why my attempts to encourage David's independence hadn't been entirely successful. The psychological conditioning he'd experienced required more than just alternative perspectives or career opportunities. It needed systematic counter-conditioning that rebuilt his confidence and restored his ability to trust his own professional judgment. More importantly, Patricia explained that addressing manipulative management required strategic thinking about organizational dynamics, documentation of problematic behavior, and careful timing of interventions to maximize effectiveness while minimizing retaliation. Individual resistance was rarely sufficient because manipulative managers typically had contingency plans for dealing with challenges to their authority. The conversation with Patricia revealed that my business background had provided me with some relevant skills for understanding workplace manipulation, but that I lacked the specific expertise needed to design and implement effective intervention strategies. Patricia offered to provide informal consultation on the situation, sharing techniques and approaches that had proven successful in similar circumstances. Patricia's first recommendation was to begin comprehensive documentation of Jennifer's behavior patterns, including specific incidents, timing, and impacts on David and other team members. This documentation would serve multiple purposes, providing evidence for potential formal complaints, creating a clear picture of escalation patterns, and helping David recognize the systematic nature of the manipulation he was experiencing. The documentation process required careful attention to factual accuracy and emotional neutrality, as personal grievances or subjective interpretations could be dismissed as workplace conflicts rather than legitimate concerns about management practices. Patricia provided templates and guidelines for recording incidents in ways that would be credible to HR departments, legal advisors, or upper management if formal intervention became necessary. Patricia also recommended researching Jennifer's background more thoroughly, looking for patterns of similar behavior in previous positions and identifying potential vulnerabilities in her current situation. Manipulative managers often had histories of creating problems that their victims didn't report due to fear of retaliation, and uncovering these patterns could provide leverage for addressing current behavior. The research into Jennifer's professional history revealed disturbing parallels to her current behavior at TechFlow. Through careful investigation of her previous positions, including conversations with former colleagues and industry contacts, I discovered a pattern of employee complaints, high turnover rates, and organizational problems that coincided with her management responsibilities. Most significantly, I learned that Jennifer had left her previous position in Dallas under circumstances that weren't entirely voluntary. While her departure had been framed as a career advancement opportunity, informal sources suggested that upper management had grown concerned about employee retention problems and client complaints related to her team's performance and morale. This information provided crucial context for understanding Jennifer's motivations and potential vulnerabilities. Her aggressive behavior at TechFlow might represent attempts to establish dominance quickly before similar patterns of problems could develop, or it might indicate desperation to prove her value through visible results regardless of the human costs involved. Patricia's guidance also helped me understand the importance of building alliances with other people affected by Jennifer's behavior, both within TechFlow and in the broader Austin business community. Isolated complaints about manipulative managers were often dismissed or discredited, but patterns of similar concerns from multiple sources carried significantly more weight with decision makers. The process of identifying potential allies required delicate investigation, as Jennifer's supporters like Michael Torres might report information back to her that could trigger retaliation against David or others. However, Patricia provided techniques for approaching potentially sympathetic colleagues in ways that minimized risks while gathering information about their experiences and concerns. Ryan Martinez emerged as a particularly valuable potential ally, as his experience and technical competence made him a credible source of information about team dynamics and management effectiveness. His private concerns about Jennifer's methods, combined with his documentation of specific incidents, provided additional perspective on the scope and impact of her manipulative behavior. Ashley Kim's resistance strategies also provided useful intelligence about Jennifer's responses to boundary setting and her methods for marginalizing employees who didn't fully embrace her authority. Ashley's experience demonstrated that professional survival under Jennifer's management was possible but required exceptional competence and emotional resilience that most people couldn't sustain long-term. Patricia's consultation revealed that my business experience with Chen Digital Marketing had indeed provided relevant skills for understanding manipulation and developing resistance strategies. However, she emphasized that workplace intervention required different approaches than business negotiation, particularly regarding legal considerations and organizational politics that could affect multiple people's careers and livelihoods. The skills I'd developed in building client relationships, managing difficult personalities, and navigating competitive business environments translated well to understanding Jennifer's methods and motivations. My experience with demanding clients had taught me to recognize manipulation techniques and develop strategies for maintaining professional boundaries while achieving business objectives. More importantly, my entrepreneurial background had provided me with independence and resources that most employees lacked when facing workplace manipulation. The success of Chen Digital Marketing meant that I wasn't dependent on David's income for financial security, and my business relationships provided access to legal consulting and strategic resources that could be valuable for addressing Jennifer's behavior. Patricia helped me understand that this independence represented a significant advantage in dealing with Jennifer's manipulation, as she relied on her victim's financial dependence and limited options to maintain control. My ability to support David through a career transition or workplace conflict gave us flexibility that Jennifer probably hadn't anticipated when calculating the risks of her behavior. The strategic planning process that Patricia guided me through revealed the importance of timing and coordination.
Addressing manipulative management. Premature action could trigger retaliation that would harm David and other team members, while delayed intervention might allow Jennifer to consolidate her position further or cause additional psychological damage to her victims. Patricia recommended a phased approach that would begin with strengthening David's confidence and documentation while building alliances with other affected parties. The second phase would involve formal documentation of concerns through appropriate channels, while the final phase might require external pressure or intervention if internal processes proved insufficient. The phased strategy required patience and discipline, as the temptation to confront Jennifer directly was strong given the obvious harm she was causing. However, Patricia's experience had shown that premature confrontation often backfired by allowing manipulative managers to position themselves as victims of workplace conflicts rather than perpetrators of systematic abuse. Patricia's guidance also emphasized the importance of protecting David and other team members from retaliation during any intervention process. Manipulative managers typically responded to challenges by escalating their behavior toward perceived threats, and careful planning was required to minimize these risks while maintaining pressure for change. The consultation with Patricia provided me with sophisticated understanding of workplace manipulation and practical strategies for addressing it effectively. Her expertise filled crucial gaps in my knowledge while validating my instincts about the seriousness of Jennifer's behavior and the need for systematic intervention rather than individual resistance. Most importantly, Patricia helped me understand that the skills and resources I developed through building Chen Digital Marketing could be leveraged effectively to address Jennifer's manipulation, but only through strategic planning and careful execution that considered the complex organizational and interpersonal dynamics involved. The mentorship relationship with Patricia would prove essential for navigating the challenges ahead, as her experience provided guidance for avoiding common pitfalls while maximizing the effectiveness of intervention strategies. Her support also provided confidence that Jennifer's manipulation could be addressed successfully without causing unnecessary harm to David or other innocent parties. The education I received from Patricia transformed my understanding of the situation from a personal conflict between Jennifer and David to a systematic problem that required sophisticated intervention strategies. This broader perspective would prove crucial for developing approaches that could neutralize Jennifer's authority while protecting everyone affected by her manipulative management practices. Armed with Patricia's guidance and strategic framework, I began the careful process of building the foundation for a comprehensive response to Jennifer's behavior that would address both the immediate threats to David's well-being and the broader organizational problems her management was creating at TechFlow. Part 8. The first major setback. The initial phase of our strategic response to Jennifer's manipulation encountered an unexpected obstacle that nearly derailed our carefully planned intervention before it could gain momentum. David's growing confidence and modest resistance to Jennifer's demands had not gone unnoticed, and her response was swift, sophisticated, and devastating in ways that neither Patricia nor I had fully anticipated. The setback began when David attempted to implement one of the boundary-setting strategies Patricia had recommended, specifically declining to participate in an optional weekend brainstorming session that Jennifer had scheduled with less than 24 hours' notice. The session was ostensibly designed to address client feedback on a project that wasn't scheduled for delivery until the following month, making the urgent timing questionable at best. David's polite but firm refusal to attend the weekend session represented significant progress in his recovery from Jennifer's psychological conditioning. For the first time since her arrival at TechFlow, he prioritized personal plans over her manufactured urgencies, citing the short notice and non-critical nature of the work as legitimate reasons for maintaining his scheduled time off.
Jennifer's response to David's boundary setting was immediate and multifaceted, demonstrating the sophisticated retaliation strategies that Patricia had warned us about but that we hadn't fully prepared to counter. Rather than expressing disappointment or arguing about the importance of the weekend session, Jennifer accepted David's decision with apparent understanding while simultaneously implementing a comprehensive campaign to undermine his position within the team and organization. The retaliation began with subtle changes to David's project assignments and responsibilities that were difficult to challenge without appearing paranoid or oversensitive. Jennifer started assigning him to lower visibility projects while giving high-profile opportunities to team members who had demonstrated greater enthusiasm for her leadership style. She also began excluding him from strategic planning discussions and client meetings where his technical expertise would normally be valuable. More damaging was Jennifer's systematic campaign to reframe David's professional competence and commitment within the broader organization. She began sharing concerns about his attitude and responsiveness with Robert Johnson and other managers, positioning herself as a supportive leader trying to help a valuable employee work through performance issues that were affecting team dynamics and client relationships. Jennifer's skill at organizational politics became evident as she transformed David's modest boundary setting into evidence of broader performance problems that required management attention and intervention. She documented every instance of perceived resistance or lack of enthusiasm, building a comprehensive case that David was becoming a problem employee who needed either intensive coaching or possible replacement. The psychological impact on David was devastating and immediate. After months of conditioning to view Jennifer's approval as essential for his professional success, her systematic withdrawal of that approval triggered intense anxiety and self-doubt that undermined all the progress we'd made in rebuilding his confidence. He began questioning whether his boundary setting had been reasonable or evidence of the professional inadequacy that Jennifer was now documenting. David's response to Jennifer's retaliation revealed the depth of psychological damage that her manipulation had caused. Despite clear evidence that her behavior was punitive and disproportionate, he internalized her criticism and began working overtime to regain her approval. The boundary-setting experiment was abandoned as David reverted to patterns of excessive availability and accommodation that had characterized his behavior before our intervention. The professional isolation that Jennifer orchestrated was particularly effective because it leveraged David's natural desire for collaborative relationships and meaningful work. By excluding him from interesting projects and important discussions, she created a work environment that felt punitive and demoralizing while maintaining plausible cover that her decisions were based on legitimate business considerations rather than personal retaliation. I watched David's confidence collapse in real time as Jennifer's retaliation campaign intensified throughout the following weeks. The man who had begun questioning her methods and asserting reasonable boundaries disappeared, replaced by someone who anxiously monitored her reactions and desperately sought evidence that his professional standing could be restored through increased compliance and dedication. The setback was particularly demoralizing because it demonstrated that individual resistance to Jennifer's manipulation was not only ineffective but potentially counterproductive. David's attempt to establish modest boundaries had triggered retaliation that left him in a worse position than before, confirming Jennifer's power while reinforcing the psychological conditioning that made him dependent on her approval. Patricia's analysis of the setback provided crucial insight into the sophistication of Jennifer's manipulation and the challenges we faced in developing effective resistance strategies. Manipulative managers like Jennifer typically had extensive experience dealing with resistance and had developed comprehensive playbooks for neutralizing challenges to their authority while maintaining plausible cover for their behavior. The retaliation campaign against David followed patterns that Patricia had observed in similar situations, where managers used organizational policies and procedures as weapons against employees who challenged their authority. By framing David's boundary setting as performance problems rather than reasonable resistance to unreasonable demands, Jennifer had positioned herself as a responsible manager addressing legitimate workplace issues. More troubling was the recognition that Jennifer's retaliation would likely escalate if we continued pursuing individual resistance strategies without addressing the broader organizational dynamics that enabled her behavior. David's isolation within TechFlow was becoming more pronounced, and his psychological state was deteriorating to the point where his ability to maintain basic job performance was being compromised. The failure of our initial strategy forced a comprehensive reassessment of our approach and assumptions about what would be required to address Jennifer's manipulation effectively. Individual resistance was clearly insufficient and potentially harmful, while formal complaints through HR channels seemed unlikely to succeed, given Jennifer's skill at documenting her behavior in ways that appeared reasonable to outside observers. Patricia recommended a strategic retreat from direct confrontation while we developed more sophisticated approaches that could address the organizational and interpersonal dynamics enabling Jennifer's manipulation. This meant temporarily accepting her authority while building the foundation for intervention strategies that could neutralize her power without triggering further retaliation against David. The retreat strategy required significant emotional discipline, as watching Jennifer's systematic destruction of David's confidence and professional standing was increasingly difficult to tolerate. However, Patricia's experience had shown that premature escalation often resulted in additional harm to manipulation victims while strengthening their abusers' positions within organizations. During this difficult period, my focus shifted from supporting David's resistance to providing emotional stability and perspective that could help him survive Jennifer's retaliation without suffering permanent psychological damage. This involved reinforcing his sense of professional competence independent of Jennifer's evaluation while maintaining hope that the situation could be addressed effectively through alternative strategies. The documentation of Jennifer's retaliation provided valuable evidence for potential future interventions, but it also revealed the systematic nature of her manipulation and the sophistication of her methods for maintaining control while avoiding accountability. Her ability to weaponize organizational processes and relationships demonstrated expertise that extended far beyond simple workplace bullying or poor management skills. The setback also clarified the stakes involved in challenging Jennifer's authority and the resources that would be required for effective intervention. Her willingness to destroy David's career prospects in response to modest boundary setting indicated that she viewed any resistance as an existential threat that required comprehensive response, making compromise or accommodation impossible. Understanding the full scope of Jennifer's retaliation capabilities was demoralizing, but also strategically valuable, as it provided insight into her methods and potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited through more sophisticated intervention approaches. Her reliance on organizational politics and documentation meant that she was vulnerable to external pressure that could expose the manipulative nature of her behavior. The emotional toll of watching David's deterioration during this period was significant, as his natural optimism and professional confidence were systematically destroyed through Jennifer's calculated retaliation. However, the experience also strengthened my resolve to find effective ways to address her manipulation and protect others who might become targets of similar abuse. Patricia's guidance during this difficult phase emphasized the importance of maintaining perspective and strategic thinking despite the emotional impact of Jennifer's behavior. The setback was painful but also educational, providing crucial information about our opponent's capabilities and methods that would inform more effective strategies in the future. The failure of individual resistance strategies marked the end of attempts to address Jennifer's manipulation through David's personal actions and the beginning of more comprehensive approaches that would leverage external resources and relationships to neutralize her authority. The education provided by this setback would prove invaluable for developing intervention strategies that could succeed where individual resistance had failed. Part 9: The Apprenticeship Phase. The aftermath of our failed boundary-setting experiment forced me to fundamentally reconsider my approach to Jennifer's manipulation, leading to what Patricia termed an apprenticeship phase where I would develop the sophisticated skills and strategic thinking necessary to challenge someone as systematically manipulative as Jennifer Walsh. This period required patient observation, careful study of organizational dynamics, and the gradual building of resources and relationships that could eventually be leveraged for effective intervention. Patricia's guidance during this phase emphasized that confronting manipulative managers required expertise comparable to their own, developed through systematic study of their methods and comprehensive understanding of the organizational and psychological factors that enabled their behavior. The apprenticeship involved learning to think strategically about workplace politics, documentation techniques, and intervention timing while building the foundation for more sophisticated resistance approaches. The first component of my education involved detailed analysis of Jennifer's behavior patterns and decision-making processes, moving beyond simple documentation of problematic incidents to understanding the strategic thinking behind her actions. Patricia helped me recognize that Jennifer's manipulation followed sophisticated psychological principles rather than random cruelty, and that effective resistance required matching her level of strategic sophistication. Through careful observation, I began identifying the specific techniques Jennifer used to maintain control over team members while avoiding accountability for her behavior. Her methods included strategic use of praise and criticism to create psychological dependence, systematic isolation of potential resistance, and careful documentation of her actions in ways that appeared reasonable to outside observers while concealing their manipulative intent. Jennifer's skill at organizational politics became increasingly apparent as I studied her interactions with upper management, other department heads, and external stakeholders. She consistently positioned herself as a solution to problems rather than their source, taking credit for positive outcomes while deflecting responsibility for negative consequences. Her reports to Robert Johnson emphasized metrics and achievements that supported her value to the organization while minimizing information about employee concerns or turnover. The apprenticeship phase also involved developing my own expertise in areas where Jennifer had natural advantages, particularly regarding corporate communication, performance documentation, and relationship management within professional organizations. Patricia provided training in these areas while helping me leverage my entrepreneurial background and business relationships to create alternative sources of influence and information. My experience building Chen Digital Marketing had provided some relevant skills, particularly regarding strategic thinking, relationship management, and resource allocation under pressure. However, addressing workplace manipulation required additional competencies in areas like employment law, organizational psychology, and corporate governance that I needed to develop through focused study and expert consultation. Patricia connected me with other professionals who had experience dealing with toxic management situations, including employment attorneys, organizational consultants, and former corporate executives who had successfully addressed similar problems. These relationships provided access to expertise and resources that would prove crucial for developing comprehensive intervention strategies. The legal consultation was particularly valuable for understanding the formal processes available for addressing workplace manipulation and the evidence standards required for successful complaints through HR departments or external agencies. Employment attorney Michael Harrison explained that proving manipulation and retaliation required extensive documentation and multiple corroborating sources, as individual complaints were often dismissed as personality conflicts or performance issues. Michael's analysis of David's situation revealed that Jennifer's sophisticated approach to manipulation would be difficult to address through formal complaints alone, as she had been careful to document her behavior in ways that appeared reasonable while concealing the psychological pressure and retaliation that characterized her actual management style. Successful intervention would require evidence from multiple sources and strategic pressure that extended beyond internal company processes. The organizational psychology consultation provided insight into the systemic factors that enabled Jennifer's manipulation and the intervention approaches most likely to succeed in corporate environments. Dr. Sarah Martinez explained that toxic managers typically thrived in organizations that prioritized short-term results over employee well-being and that lacked sophisticated systems for identifying and addressing psychological manipulation. Dr. Martinez's assessment of TechFlow's culture revealed several vulnerabilities that Jennifer was exploiting, including inadequate management training, weak feedback systems, and performance metrics that emphasized productivity over sustainability. These organizational weaknesses created an environment where manipulative behavior could persist and escalate without triggering effective intervention from upper management. The apprenticeship phase involved developing my understanding of these organizational dynamics while building relationships and resources that could eventually be used to address them. This required patient cultivation of contacts within TechFlow, the broader Austin business community, and professional networks that intersected with the company's operations and reputation. Through careful networking and relationship building, I began identifying people who had concerns about Jennifer's impact on TechFlow's culture and effectiveness, though most were reluctant to voice these concerns directly due to her strong relationship with upper management. The information gathering process required delicate balancing of curiosity and discretion, as premature disclosure of my intentions could trigger retaliation against David or other potential allies. Ryan Martinez emerged as a particularly valuable source of information and potential support, as his technical competence and professional standing made him a credible witness to Jennifer's manipulative behavior. His documentation of specific incidents provided additional evidence of patterns that extended beyond David's individual experience, suggesting that Jennifer's methods affected multiple team members in similar ways. Ashley Kim's ongoing resistance to Jennifer's authority provided another perspective on the psychological and professional costs of maintaining boundaries under her management. Ashley's experience demonstrated that survival under Jennifer was possible but required exceptional competence and emotional resilience that most people couldn't sustain, while her isolation within the team showed the price of refusing to embrace Jennifer's comprehensive vision of commitment. The apprenticeship phase also involved developing my understanding of Jennifer's background and professional history, using industry connections and careful investigation to uncover patterns of behavior that might provide leverage for future intervention. This research revealed a troubling history of employee complaints and turnover that had been minimized or concealed during her hiring process at TechFlow. Most significantly, I discovered that Jennifer's departure from her previous position in Dallas had involved confidential settlements with former employees who had filed complaints about her management practices. While the specific details weren't available, the existence of these settlements suggested a pattern of problematic behavior that TechFlow's leadership might not have been aware of when they hired her. This information provided potential leverage for addressing Jennifer's current behavior, as evidence of previous problems could undermine her credibility and force TechFlow's leadership to take current complaints more seriously. However, using this information would require careful legal and strategic consideration to avoid potential liability or retaliation. Patricia's guidance emphasized that the apprenticeship phase was essential preparation for more aggressive intervention strategies, but that rushing the process could undermine the effectiveness of future actions. The goal was to develop comprehensive understanding of the situation while building the resources and relationships necessary for successful intervention when the timing was appropriate. The emotional discipline required during this period was considerable, as watching Jennifer's continued manipulation of David and other team members was increasingly difficult to tolerate. However, the systematic approach Patricia recommended provided confidence that effective action was possible if properly planned and executed, making the temporary patience more tolerable. David's condition during this period remained concerning, as Jennifer's retaliation had left him anxious, demoralized, and increasingly isolated within his own workplace. Supporting him through this difficult time while maintaining operational security for our longer-term strategy required careful balance between emotional support and strategic discretion. The apprenticeship phase concluded when I had developed sufficient expertise and resources to begin implementing more sophisticated intervention strategies that could address Jennifer's manipulation comprehensively rather than through piecemeal resistance. The foundation built during this period would prove essential for the success of more aggressive approaches that would follow. The education I received during the apprenticeship transformed my understanding of workplace manipulation from a personal problem affecting David to a systematic issue requiring strategic intervention at multiple levels. This broader perspective would prove crucial for developing approaches that could neutralize Jennifer's authority while protecting everyone affected by her manipulative management practices. Part 10. The Opportunity Recognition. The breakthrough opportunity that would allow me to challenge Jennifer's authority comprehensively emerged from an unexpected intersection of my business relationships, her professional vulnerabilities, and TechFlow's evolving strategic priorities. The convergence of these factors created a window for intervention that hadn't existed during earlier phases of our struggle, providing the leverage necessary to address her manipulation while minimizing risks to David and other potential victims. The opportunity began with a conversation during a routine client meeting for Chen Digital Marketing, where I was discussing social media strategy with Kevin Thompson, the marketing director for Riverside Medical Group. Kevin mentioned that his organization was evaluating software solutions for patient management and electronic health records, and that they were particularly interested in working with local Austin companies that understood the healthcare industry's specific requirements and regulatory environment. During our conversation, Kevin described his frustration with previous software vendors who had promised comprehensive solutions but delivered systems that were difficult to use, poorly integrated with existing workflows, and inadequately supported after implementation. Riverside Medical Group was specifically seeking a development partner that could provide ongoing collaboration and customization rather than simply delivering a finished product and disappearing. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.